Hey y'all, it is your burnout bestie Peter here with another fresh episode of the Millennial Reset. So, if you are feeling a little bit discouraged with the state of the world right now and need a space to be able to just reset your fried nervous system and find your people, then you are exactly where you need to be, my friend. On today's episode, I am super excited to be able to have another one of our millennial mental health experts, Lindsey Lopez, joining us to talk about why, especially as millennials, we adult so hard that we forget to play. And we're going to learn some different ways talking to Lindsey about how we can integrate more play into our daily lives regardless of if the world is on fire or not. Because, here's the thing. I think bottom line is that you and me both deserve to be able to remember what it feels like to feel joy. So that's what today is all about. Let's dive right into things. First and foremost, Lindsey Lopez, welcome to your debut on the Millennial Reset podcast. So excited to have you. Tell everybody a little bit about who you are, your background, and anything else.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm so honored as your millennial bestie, one of them at least. A huge fan of yours, and I'm just so honored to be here. A little bit about me. I'm a mom and a wife, so I have a family to juggle along with work and life. I'm a writer, an occupational therapy professional, public health professional, life coach, infant early childhood mental health consultant, and I've kind of landed in the early childhood profession over the last few years, and some refer to me as the champion of play. I'm so excited to dive into how we can integrate more play into our lives.
Uh, Lindsay, I didn't realize this until just now, but oh my gosh, you are such a typical millennial because you have about like 10 different titles that you just gave yourself there all at
Yeah.
once. We all wear many, many hats.
Yes, well, it's because too, and it was referred to on your last podcast actually, how we follow kind of that linear path of going to school, and maybe we don't even explore what we really want to do with our lives when we grow up, or we find those pressures.
Yeah.
So I landed in various areas throughout my profession because really I evolved over the years into developing my passions and my pursuits. So um, that's where I've landed now is in the early childhood world and
Yeah.
supporting mental health and many other areas. So I
Yeah.
think we all fall into that trap as millennials.
And yeah, I think it's great that we're giving ourselves permission to be able to make the moves and add on the additional titles as we, go throughout our lives. So thank you for being a perfect example of that. So let's dive into the topic of play. I think for a lot of us, it's been so long since we've had the time or the energy to even play that maybe we've even forgotten about like what the heck does play even mean? So when we talk about like play and integrating it into our lives, right? Like, what does that mean from your perspective, Lindsay? And what role does play in our lives?
Well, as we're all working on all of those certificates and certifications and college degrees and climbing the corporate ladder, yeah, we absolutely adult so hard we forget how to play. And I think what it means is we are just not creating space and time for ourselves to get into that playful state. We become sometimes even our parents we're just working so hard and we're so busy that we don't think that we need time for play. It doesn't seem to be productive.
Mm, yeah, that definitely hits home right there. And I think that's a lot of people come on my posts and they comment about that of like, oh my gosh, that hits home. Like we're all subconsciously addicted to stress and productivity, but it's so true. It's like not only do we feel like at least we feel like we don't have time. I don't know, maybe we do, but we kind of make ourselves believe that we don't. But I think the other thing too that I was thinking about the other day when we talk about like this whole concept of play is like because we've been in this mode of like go, go, go for so long, I think that we forget about the things that we used to enjoy. because the priority is just, all about survival and just trying to make it through the day, regardless of how much time you have to play, right? So, let's dive into this a little bit more, right? So, like, when we talk about, like, especially even like growing up as young kids and the development of who we become, like, what is the role of play in all of that? Like, how does this whole concept of play into being an adult?
So we have learned through lots of research that actually young children learn through play. It's absolutely essential for their learning. It's not appropriate to give a toddler a book and expect them to learn. We need to have play to facilitate us reaching those milestones, whether it's with motor or cognition, and building those skills to get us ready for school and to prepare us for learning. It's really important to know too that we've learned through research that we learn best through play at any age because it really does activate our parasympathetic nervous system depending on the type of play. If it's more motor based, it would be also activating that sympathetic nervous system. Um, and gets us into that state of flow. And that actually allows our brain to relax, our nervous system to relax, and us to receive information and to be solidified. And if you think about learning experience as a young child or elementary age, first of all, we look back to those years as being the best years of our lives. And we don't realize that until we're adults. But yet we then don't incorporate more of that time to be in that state of play and flow and creativity and imagination into our adult lives. But if you look back on those times, you may even be able to remember times where you've had really impactful lessons that you've learned. And it was actually moments that you were playing. Maybe you were
Mm,
playing in the kitchen with your grandma cooking.
yeah.
Maybe you were at a science fair and you were able to play with materials and mix certain things. And you just remember those really impactful times that you were one, engaging in play, and two, your sensory nervous system was stimulated. And that just really helps solidify learning in our
Yeah.
brain. So that is really the importance of it.
Yeah. I was thinking about this the other day and, kind of doing some of my own research with this as well as, as kids, we knew how to regulate our nervous systems. It was almost kind of like innate to us, right? Where it was like when you were at the grocery store and you were like throwing a temper tantrum out of nowhere, that was your body's natural way of being able to release stress in that moment, right? We danced around as kids, we yelled, we screamed, right? And then one day somebody came along and said, "No, that's not appropriate, right? You can't do that." Or somebody said, "No, you can't keep doing this play thing for the rest of your life because you got to be an adult. There's work to be done. There's goals to be met, right?" And so, of course, then and there comes that point in time where we say goodbye to that version of us, or at least cover it up for the time being, because society tells us that it's all work and no play, right? Um, so let's go back to that whole idea too that we were talking about of like, for adults and what makes it so difficult for us when we talk about like how we are conditioned and how that conditioning just kind of gets strengthened over time, paired with the fact that there are so many other priorities in our life that, we don't have time, or maybe it's not even sometimes the time, but we don't have the mental energy or the capacity for play. And so let's first of all talk about this whole idea of like, okay, yeah, let's set aside this whole idea of like play to play, but are there ways where we can potentially integrate play into our daily lives, whether it be at work or with family? If we don't have time to quote unquote do our hobbies, that so many of us maybe don't even have anymore, but if we don't have the time for play, are there ways that we can make that distinction to say, can we integrate it as opposed to separating it?
Absolutely. I think that one piece of this is that we have to also think about play as caring for ourselves. So it's a form of self-care. And way back in my training as an occupational therapy professional, we learned through our therapeutic frameworks that optimal health and wellness is generated from the balance of work, leisure, and activities of daily living. And so that kind of shaped my framework to always remember how important leisure is and
Mm,
what that involves. So, leisure, of course, like you mentioned, hobbies. Is it, board games, puzzles, painting, adult coloring, hiking, writing? There's just so many options, right? But it also includes self care. What do I do to take care of myself? So, I think that that's become very trendy and sexy to talk about self-care and doing self-care and engaging in that. And what does that look like? And
mm,
sometimes we forget that play can fill up our cups too. So I think we need to start thinking about it as important as caring for ourselves.
mm-hmm.
Um, Play, are you kidding me? That's not productive. We're so busy in our society. We've been conditioned to work, work, work. And we have been conditioned to not step into creativity and imagination as well, because that allows free thinking. And you can't be work, 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 and a laborer if you're a free thinker, because then you would challenge the system. And
Yeah.
so all of this conditioning over the years and to show responsibility, and then we add more responsibilities to our plates. Sometimes we become parents, or we have a significant other, or we become caretakers of someone in our family, or we have a dog. We have a home to take care of, and we just keep adding to the things to do. And slowly that self-care or playtime or whatever it may be that we do to have an outlet just gets squashed.
Yeah.
Some recent research has been showing that kids, they're recommending, especially in early childhood, for children to be playing outdoors, playing, just playing, unstructured, stepping into
Mm-hmm.
imagination, creativity, pretend for up to 3 hours a day. Some
Ooh.
are even saying a minimum of. And that actually not only supports their learning, but also regulates their nervous system, like you referred to earlier in the question, too. Like,
Yeah.
you know, like we know that this helps to support us and regulate our nervous system. So, research is showing us that. So, why do we stop at a certain age? Why do we stop needing out 3 hours of outdoor time?
Yeah.
Why do we stop engaging in play and being in that imagination and flow state? And I think it's based on priorities and conditioning, and we become just too busy. So ways that we can start to incorporate that into like our everyday lives is that we can find opportunities to step into creativity. What are parts of my job even that I can be more creative with? What are parts of my day, like my activities of daily living, such as cooking, that maybe I can experiment with a new recipe and become a little playful in that and try that?
Yeah. You're really getting me thinking about this whole idea of like, yeah, what you were talking about when with kids needing like 3 hours of unstructured playtime per day. And it's like, you know, number one, they took away our recess when we became adults.
Mm,
But
yes,
like, who's to say that we can't give it back to ourselves now, right? Like maybe that's something I need to start doing is like thinking about my lunch breaks as more of like, yes, lunch, but also like
I
recess.
love
And
that.
I love what you said too about this whole idea of like self-care and how play incorporates into that. And I think that's something that I've really been kind of struggling with and discovering over these last several months too, is that you're kind of told by society all of these things that you should be doing for your mental health, like going to therapy and going to the workout classes and, all of the things that you should do for yourself to have good physical and mental health. And don't get me wrong, those things are great, but then it's like, what are you doing for yourself? Whether you call it play, whether you call it self-care, or whether, like for me at least, I take it down to the more granular level of just what makes me feel good. And
Yes,
whatever that is
amen.
today, I'm going to do it. And what makes me feel good today might be different from what makes me feel good tomorrow. And so I think that was just such a big learning for me of like, there's so much pressure around like, hobbies and passions and that kind of thing that it doesn't have to be anything fancy, right? It's just what's going to make you feel good. Yes, still go do the good things for your mental and your physical health that, the world tells us that we should do, but balance it out with whether you call it play, self-care, or just whatever makes you feel good.
I love that so much. I think sometimes we try to make things a little too checklisty as millennials.
Oh my gosh, yes.
Okay, I got to get my 2 mile run in. Check. Walk the dog. Check. Go to work. Check. And
Yeah.
then, oh, yeah, meditate, go to therapy. And we're not really actually invested in the activity itself, right? We're
Hmm.
just like, okay, I got to do this. I got to do this robot mode.
Yeah.
And when, like myself, I function a lot of times on borderline burnout, especially throughout my professional career, or have experienced
Hmm.
burnout and overwhelm, um, you really get into that flight or fight mode and become so checklisty. What do I have to do next? Just to
Yeah.
keep swimming, like Dory says, just keep swimming, just keep
Yeah.
swimming, and it becomes a checklist. And then so now I have to add playtime.
Yeah.
Oh gosh. And
Uh,
and you're really making it simple by saying, it's not about making it checklisty or dedicating a lot of time to it. Like pull out the simplicity of it. Like how can I just engage in more playful behaviors? What just makes
hmm.
me feel good? What fills up my cup?
Yeah. And that's the other thing too that like I was just thinking about this earlier. This conversation is like so timely is you know, I when I left my full-time job and I decided I was going to go pursue like my passion and try something out new, and I ended up burning myself out in that whole process because I didn't have the energy to like make it work for me. And so that's one thing that I've also just kind of been thinking about more and more with like trying to create more, hobbies and different things outside of the job that define my identity is putting a little bit less pressure on myself with that to say, don't feel like you have to get married to this idea of like what play means to you today or tomorrow or what hobby you're going to adopt for yourself. Like it can be simple, it can be your own thing.
And
Because,
you don't even have to be good at it.
yeah, exactly. But I think that's for me at
You
least
can
what was happening.
like pickleball, but not be good at it.
Yeah. But that what I was doing before though was like I was putting all of this pressure on myself to be like, okay, when I was going off and doing my own thing with like entrepreneurship and finding play as part of my passion, right? Is that it became something that I hated because not because I didn't like it and not because it wasn't my passion, but because I was going into it with an already burnt out nervous system. And so play, I think for me, and I think what you're talking about here that's resonating with me so much today is like play can, yeah, be that thing that allows you to be able to get back into a state of homeostasis so that you can decide what that next thing is for you. So yeah, I would love to kind of talk a little bit more about like the nerdy brain science of things here, Lindsay, of like we talk about, okay, here are some ways to integrate more play into our daily lives, ways that we can, be more present when even when we have play as an item on the checklist, ways that maybe we can be more present with that. But let's talk about like the benefits of it when we are incorporating more play into our days. Whether it be separate from work and play, work and life, or integrated in, right? What are some of the benefits that come from that? And especially when we're looking at like burnout, for example, with like the brain and the body, what happens in the brain and the body when we do play?
So I think that why, if it works so well for children, why doesn't it work for adults?
Yeah.
So I would have to say that that research applies to all human beings. Maybe research would indicate more or less time or whatnot, depending on age. But I
Hmm.
would have to say this is a human experience.
Yeah.
And whether you're an outdoor person or not, but thinking about how important play is and how it
Hmm.
activates that parasympathetic nervous system, which then calms and regulates the nervous system. The body needs to be stimulated throughout our senses, and we have seven senses, and often not only do we shut down as adult millennials emotions. Oh,
Yeah.
that's a whole other podcast. um but also the nervous system functions.
Yeah.
So we shut down, especially our output, the need to have output, also sometimes the need to have input. And we just are in such robot mode sometimes, like we're
Hmm.
AI generated computers, and we're not, we're human beings, that We forget that the
Yeah.
brain, the body needs the stimulation. So that's one piece. And activating that parasympathetic nervous system, there's many ways that you can do that. It can be as simple as breathing techniques and meditation and so many different things
Yeah.
to activate that. But once we do that, then our brains move into functioning in the frontal neocortex, and that can produce that state of flow, almost similar to meditation.
Yeah, that's what I wanted to talk to you actually about next is this whole idea of like, you read all about it. There's books out there all about like flow and like get in the flow. And let's talk about that is like how does creativity and flow or creativity and play enhance that flow state and like what the heck does it even mean to be in flow state?
Open-ended play really supports this flow state. And the reason being, when play is structured, things can be fun, like a basketball game and you're keeping score and there's some structure or there's referees and that's like your sport or whatever. It can still be fun and it can
Yeah.
still be playful, but you're still activating really that structure in your mind, and there's rules and there's less open-ended imagination and creativity happening. When you engage in open-ended play, no rules, no structures, build upon it, whatever it can be. When you go on a hike and you just keep exploring, that's what really engages that flow state and that
Hmm.
meditative state. When we are all scientists and artists and musicians, and I promise you don't even have to sing well to be a good singer or musician, when you're in that state of just allowing things to be open ended and unstructured with no rules, that's where you're going to find flow.
Mm. And I mean, at least for me, at least, it's so much less pressure to put on yourself, right?
Yeah.
When you're just playing and like you mentioned, there's not as many rules to the games, right? And there's so many rules to the game of life these days where it's just like when you can just escape from that and play allows you to be able to I think you were talking about this before, Lindsay, is like before we jumped on the podcast was like play allows you to be able to see things differently, to be able to, literally with your brain, right? Like I talk about this with the mindset stuff is like your brain is like this filtering system, right? Where it's filtering from the outside to the inside. And what we perceive as our reality is just simply a perception of reality. And how play can shift our ability to be able to perceive things differently. So let's talk a little bit more about that because you know me,
I
I'm
love
a big
that
old
so much.
mindset nerd.
Yes, so glad you went down that road, because I think about how we've learned from many meditative gurus, how that when we quiet the mind, we allow answers to come. We
Hmm.
allow problems to be solved. We invite that in. And sometimes in those states, that is when you say solve a problem, or you're able to actually deactivate that sympathetic nervous system enough for you to then be able to think clearer. That's why the ideas come to us in the shower, because
Hmm.
we're relaxed in the shower. We might be, singing, or just kind of like in the moment,
Yeah.
where our senses are stimulated. There's like this beautiful lavender scented body wash, and the water is hitting us, and we're in that flow state. And sometimes
Hmm.
that's when ideas come to you. And so sometimes I would go to work and people would think I was crazy. I'm like, so I was in the shower and I was thinking about this, and I have an idea.
Yeah.
And so I love that you thought about that, because it is so important to think about how being in that flow state supports us in problem solving. So if
Yeah.
we're facing something like burnout or something stressful in our lives, the more we're able to activate that flow state, the more actually we're able to think more clearly.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it's so true. I was reading something on like LinkedIn or whatever the other day about how they're now incorporating these like play sessions or creativity sessions into like corporate environments because
Google,
literally,
yeah.
yeah, what it does to the brain where, typically all the time, most of us as human beings are in kind of that, quote unquote, left brain, analytical, logical thinking mode. We don't really use our creative kind of right side of the brain that much anymore But these types of, workshops that they're now doing with these huge corporations are getting them to simply pull out an adult coloring book and start coloring and then begin having these really strategic conversations. And it's just so
Hmm.
fascinating to me of like the types of conversations that then come out of that can be completely game changing for that company because of simply now by allowing yourself to get into that flow state through play, you're now opening up kind of the full brain potential of what we always have access to. But because of the way that society has conditioned us to only use kind of that left brain mode of thinking all the time, we don't get the chance to bring that into the workplace. And so I just say that because I think it's a good thing for us all to remember is that, again, play doesn't always have to just be something that happens outside of work. If, especially for the managers out there that are listening to this, right? Bring play into your meetings. Can
Most
you
definitely.
imagine? Yeah, how much more?
Imagine we talked a little bit earlier about how do you incorporate play into your day, but and I referred to work being one of those spaces that you could do that. I love the idea of like your lunch break being your recess given back to
Mhm.
you. Wish we all had playgrounds at our workspaces
Oh,
too, but
right? Come
right,
on.
like I said, like Google, like how fun it oh my gosh, it's
I don't want your
just
pizza
amazing.
party. I don't even want a raise. I just want a
No
playground out
thanks.
back.
Imagine if that could actually be more supportive to our mental health than the pizza party, right? Or
Yes.
whatever it may be. Imagine if we started every meeting in that state of flow. We would be more
Yeah.
present.
And I think it even goes beyond just the workplace too, right? Imagine if every time we had a big decision to make in our lives personally, if instead of trying to think logically through, okay, how am I going to get this done? And, instead just hit pause, bust out your bucket of Legos and play for a while and just see what comes to your mind. Because, I think that's why for me, I was talking to Lindsay about this earlier about like, how do we incorporate more play into our daily lives? And for me, I think I talked about this on a previous episode too. Like one of my newest favorite hobbies is adult coloring books because there's just something about it. Like it gets me into that flow moment. And like any time that I'm trying to figure out, like, oh my God, what the fuck do I do with my life next? Like, what's the next move for me? Right. Like, all I do is I set out the intention, I ask the question, and then I get out the adult coloring book. I don't even think about it. And then what do you know? 5 minutes later, there it is. It's like a light bulb moment. It's amazing.
Mhm.
But again, it's like they never taught us these things, right?
That's a wonderful strategy because we can make choices in those moments.
Yeah.
We can either let it overcome us and fuel us into overwhelm and burnout, or we
Hmm.
can make choices to engage in something like play that we can actually care for ourselves and activate our parasympathetic nervous system and really get out of that fight or flight mode and that
Yeah.
overwhelm. And it's like if you hit a wall, play.
Right. Yeah.
Go outside, get some sun, or get the adult coloring book out, or the paints, or go
Hmm.
bake some bread. Do something to step into something that can support our well being
Yeah.
versus ruminating or
Uh-huh.
activating all of the physiological changes that happen with our body under stress.
Yeah, and I think you had mentioned this when we were chatting before too, Lindsay, and I just love it of like, why not? I mean, because so many of us, right, we miss the 90s nostalgia, and I think part of it is because we miss that feeling of the joy that that type of play brought us. So, yeah, we were talking earlier about like bust out the slip inside, right? Like
Love
bust
it.
out the power, the super soakers, right? Like get out, go find your favorite toys from the 90s and start playing again, folks, because play is not just for kids anymore, right, Lindsay?
Absolutely. I totally encourage it. I promise it will support your overall health and well-being.
Yeah.
Um, you know, many activities we can do also for exercise, like Nerf guns and super soakers,
Mm-hmm. I
and
skip it.
hiking. Yeah, I love Skip It so much. It was one of my favorite toys. But I guess that's where my conditioning started because then I started counting because it had that counter on it. Oh my God, Peter, this is like the root of my productivity. And I would just go and
Yeah,
go and go and check the counter. Did I beat myself? Time myself? I was already on
telling you.
that. Hamster
Skip it
wheel.
and yeah, skip it and Oregon Trail got us to this place.
Yeah, definitely. I totally agree.
Well, let me tell you, I mean, at least for me, this has been really eye-opening, just to be able to kind of look at play from a different lens, especially as millennials that are, desperate for ways to be able to find some solace in this crazy world that we live in. So first and foremost, Lindsey, thank you so much for joining us. Lindsey will be on for a couple of other episodes as well, hopefully this season. So more to come. But really appreciate you sharing your knowledge. And before I let you go, Lindsey, we must know from you, what do you do to play? What is your version of play?
I love to paint and write.
What kind of writing?
Well, I'm working on a book. So that's exciting. But I also love to blog and do some creative writing too.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's great. I love to cook too. So those are things and hike, but like on the like daily writing, cooking, and just having fun conversations and play with my daughter too is a lot of fun.
Yeah, I love that. I do not have kids, and thank goodness that I don't because I could not afford them. But yeah, same way with my dog. It's like I get up every morning, and it's just like part of my routine is we just have like a good 15 to 20 minutes of playtime, and I talk to him in weird voices, and that's my play.
We sing like really fun songs to our dogs. Like we make up songs. Another thing I like to do in the summer is garden.
Hmm.
It's like
Typical
experimenting.
millennial.
Yeah, I know. Like just totally homesteading. I grew up near a city and now I have chickens, like total
Yeah.
millennial, like let's live off the grid and eat goat milk or drink goat milk or whatever.
Uh-huh.
I'm here for it. I have two goats named Beyonce and Jay-Z.
Oh my
And
gosh.
so I
Yeah.
encourage everyone to try something new, even if you're not good at it. And you don't
Hmm.
have to commit to that hobby or that activity for the rest of your life. You can like it for a couple of years and say, oh, I'm not into painting anymore and try something
Yeah,
new.
exactly. So yeah, I think that's a good way to kind of end things today is maybe it's a public announcement, a public service calling for all of you out there is find one way today to include more play. Doesn't have to be anything crazy.
I love that. Start simple.
Yeah.
And you don't have to dedicate 3 hours.
Yeah. 10
It can
minutes.
be 3 minutes. Yeah, it can
Yep.
be 10 minutes. It can be a minute.
Exactly. And I think the piece of that I think a lot of the times people avoid playing is that they don't know that there's a benefit to it, right? So now that you
Mm.
know that there's a benefit to it, now that you know how kind of some of the brain science of what it's actually doing for not only your body but also your brain and your mind, go get you some play in today, besties. Thank you again, Lindsey, so much for joining us. And thank you all for tuning in to another episode. If you like what you hear, don't forget to follow. Don't forget to share with one of your millennial besties that might need to hear this message today. And if you really want to support, you could go give a review wherever you listen to your podcasts. But regardless, thank you all so much for joining in and supporting the show. And hope to see you next time on the Millennial Reset.